My husband humiliated me, claiming I couldn't have children and left me for a young fertile woman. He never expected the secret test results to expose his own infertility. I held the test results in my trembling hands, my heart pounding with disbelief. He had humiliated me, blamed me, left me for another woman, convinced I was the problem. But the truth? The truth was something he never saw coming. Parker thought he had everything figured out. In his mind, I was the one who had failed, the one who had turned our marriage into a disappointment. And so, without hesitation, he walked away, leaving me with nothing but accusations and a broken heart. But fate has a way of setting things right. What he didn't know was that before he discarded me like I was nothing, I had already uncovered the truth. A truth that would shatter his world just as he had shattered mine. But before everything unraveled, before the humiliation and the betrayal, there was a time when I believed Parker and I were meant to last forever. I still remember the first time I met him, the way his presence had filled the room, confident and effortless. He had a charm that made people want to be around him, a kind of magnetic pull that made it impossible to ignore him. And I had fallen for him, hard. Before we go, I want to thank you for being part of this journey. Stella's story is a reminder that true strength comes from rising above and finding happiness. If you enjoy stories of empowerment and resilience, consider subscribing. It's free and helps us grow this amazing community. Our love story had started like something out of a fairy tale. The wedding had been beautiful, filled with laughter and promises whispered under soft golden lights. I had been so sure that Parker was the man I would grow old with, the one I would build a family with. For the first 3 months, it truly felt like that was our destiny. We were inseparable, lost in the newness of marriage, wrapped up in each other's worlds. We spent weekends curled up on the couch talking about everything and nothing. He would hold my hand during long drives, stealing glances at me as if I was the most precious thing in his life. I had been happy. We had been happy. And then slowly things began to change. First it was subtle. Parker started coming home later than usual, brushing it off as extra work. His texts became shorter, responses delayed. I convinced myself that it was normal, that the honeymoon phase didn't last forever, that this was simply the natural progression of marriage. But then the silence became louder. One evening we sat at the dining table eating dinner in an unsettling quiet. I glanced up at him, searching for the warmth that used to be there, but he seemed distant, lost in his own thoughts. "Is everything okay?" I asked softly, my fingers tightening around my fork. He looked up briefly, then shook his head. "Yeah, just tired." That was the first lie. I ignored it, brushing it off as exhaustion from work. But then his touches became less frequent. The playful teasing, the effortless laughter, the long conversations, everything that had once defined us began to fade away. It wasn't just in the way he looked at me, it was in the way he no longer did. And then his mother started visiting more frequently. She had never been particularly warm toward me, but now her passive-aggressive remarks became sharper, more pointed. "Some women just aren't meant to be mothers, Stella. It's unfortunate, really. You know, back in my day, women who couldn't conceive at least had the decency to consider other options. A family isn't complete without children. Parker deserves to experience that." Her words cut deeper than I let on. At first, I tried to ignore them, convinced that she was simply being cruel for the sake of it. But when Parker started echoing her sentiments, when his silences turned into cold avoidance, I began to wonder if they were right. "Maybe we should see a doctor," he had said one night, his voice carefully neutral. I had blinked at him, my stomach twisting into knots. "A doctor? Why?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's been months, Stella. We've been trying, but nothing's happening. Don't you think it's time to find out why?" Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten. I could hear the edge in his voice, the underlying frustration. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an accusation. And just like that, the doubt began to creep in. Was I the reason we weren't able to conceive? Had I failed him, failed our marriage? The uncertainty consumed me. Every time his mother came over, her glances filled with disapproval, I felt smaller. Every time Parker avoided my touch, I felt more distant from the man I had once believed loved me unconditionally. My days became heavier, filled with second-guessing. I started researching every possible reason why we weren't able to conceive, reading article after article, trying to find an answer that made sense. I looked at myself differently in the mirror, wondering if there was something broken inside me that I just couldn't see. And then the late nights became more frequent. Parker would come home later and later, sometimes not at all. The excuses were always the same: work, meetings, exhaustion. But his cologne smelled different. His clothes carried unfamiliar traces of perfume. I told myself I was imagining things, that he wouldn't do this to me, not after everything we had built together. But deep down I knew. The man I had married was slipping away, and no matter how hard I tried to hold on to him, he was already gone. One night I stayed up waiting for him. The clock ticked past midnight, then 1 a.m., then 2. My stomach churned with unease as I sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at the front door, willing it to open. When it finally did, he stepped inside, looking startled to see me awake. "Why are you up?" he asked, his voice slightly defensive. "Where were you?" I whispered. He hesitated, then sighed. "I told you work ran late." "Parker." My voice wavered, my hands gripping the blanket draped over my lap. "If there's something going on, just tell me." For a moment something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or hesitation. But then he shook his head, his expression hardening. "You're imagining things, Stella." Those words, so dismissive, so cold, were the final push I needed to realize the truth. This wasn't my fault. Something was wrong. And for the first time I decided I needed to find out what. I wasn't going to let them make me feel small anymore. Parker and his mother had spent months making me believe I was the problem. But I was done accepting their version of the truth. So, without telling him, without telling anyone, I made an appointment. I needed answers. And soon I would have them. Little did Parker know, the moment he accused me of failing him was the same moment he had set his own downfall into motion. Because the truth was about to change everything. The moment I scheduled that doctor's appointment, something inside me shifted. A quiet determination replaced the exhaustion I had carried for months. I wasn't going to sit in silence anymore. I wasn't going to let Parker's cold stares and his mother's cruel remarks define me. I needed answers, not just for him but for myself. The day of the appointment arrived, and as I sat in the sterile waiting room, my fingers twisted anxiously in my lap. My mind raced with possibilities. What if there really was something wrong with me? What if Parker had been right all along? The thought made my stomach churn, but I forced myself to breathe. Whatever the results were, at least I would finally know the truth. When the doctor finally returned, holding a sheet of paper with my results, my hands clenched against my thighs. "You're perfectly healthy, Mrs. Harris. There is no medical reason preventing you from having children." I blinked. The words felt surreal, almost as if I had misheard her. I am." My voice came out unsteady. She smiled reassuringly. "Yes. Everything is normal. You have no fertility issues." A rush of relief flooded through me, but it was immediately followed by something sharper, more insidious: realization. If I wasn't the problem, then who was? The answer was so obvious, so clear, I almost felt foolish for not seeing it sooner. Parker. Everything, his avoidance, his anger, his mother's accusations, it had all been built on a lie. A lie he had either willingly convinced himself of or had been too cowardly to face. I left the clinic gripping those test results like a lifeline. I had spent so long believing I was broken, but in reality, Parker had used me as a shield for his own inadequacies. The humiliation I had endured, the whispered insults from his mother, the way he had grown distant. All of it had been based on his unspoken fear. For a brief moment I considered confronting him right away. I imagined storming into our house, slamming the papers on the table, demanding an explanation. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized I had uncovered the truth. But then a different thought entered my mind. Well, not yet. Parker had spent months making me feel powerless. If I revealed what I knew now, he would have time to come up with excuses, to twist the truth in a way that made him the victim. He had already proven he was capable of manipulation. I wasn't about to give him that chance again. So I folded the papers neatly and tucked them away in my bag. I would wait. Let him believe his version of reality a little longer. Let him feel comfortable in his deception. Because when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't just be in a quiet confrontation behind closed doors. I would make sure he never forgot it. The change in me must have been obvious because Parker noticed almost immediately. "You seem different," he remarked one evening, his brows furrowed as he watched me across the dinner table. I merely shrugged, offering a small smile. "Just focusing on myself more." He studied me for a moment, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "Good. Let him wonder." Let him feel the same uncertainty I had felt for months. But Parker wasn't the only one who noticed my shift. His mother did too. She came over unannounced one afternoon as she often did, her lips curling in disapproval the moment she stepped into the living room. "You're awfully quiet these days, Stella," she mused, settling into the chair opposite me. "Usually women in your situation are more concerned." I didn't flinch. Didn't let her words get under my skin like they once did. Instead, I met her gaze, calm and unwavering. "Concerned about what?" I asked, tilting my head. She scoffed. "Oh, come now. You know exactly what I mean. A woman should know her place in a marriage, especially when she can't provide what's expected of her." It was almost amusing how confident she was in her ignorance. I could have told her then. Could have watched the superiority drain from her face in real time. But I bit my tongue and smiled instead. "Don't worry," I said softly. "Everything will be clear soon enough." She didn't understand my meaning, but she narrowed her eyes in suspicion before leaving, clearly unsettled by my unshaken demeanor. The truth was, my patience was wearing thin. Parker's cold behavior, his mother's constant needling. It was becoming unbearable knowing what I knew. But I forced myself to wait, to let them dig themselves deeper into their own deception. Until the night everything broke apart. It started with an unexpected phone call. Parker had been distant lately, more than usual. He had started staying in another city for work, disappearing for days at a time. At first, I had assumed it was just another excuse to avoid being around me. But something about this absence felt different. That evening my phone rang, the sound slicing through the quiet of the house. Parker's name flashed across the screen. I hesitated for only a moment before answering. "Hello." There was silence on the other end, then a heavy sigh. "We need to talk." Something in his tone made my stomach twist, but I kept my voice steady. "About what?" He exhaled again as if preparing himself. Then, in a voice so detached, so final, he said, "I'm divorcing you. You can't give me children. I deserve better." For a moment I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then slowly I leaned back against the couch, gripping my phone tightly. I should have felt broken. I should have crumbled under the weight of his words. But instead, a bitter smile curled at the corner of my lips. He really thought he had won. "Is that so?" I murmured, keeping my voice calm, unreadable. "I'm sorry, Stella. I can't do this anymore." "Liar." "I understand," I said smoothly, my fingers brushing over my bag. The very bag that held the test results he had no idea existed. "I knew you would," he replied, his tone relieved. As if he had expected me to sob, to beg. He had no idea what was coming. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer soon," he added. I smiled. "Oh, Parker, you'll be hearing from me first." I ended the call before he could say anything else, staring at the screen with quiet satisfaction. He had chosen this. He had written the final chapter of our marriage. But he had no idea that the real story was just beginning. And soon, very soon, I was going to make sure he regretted every single thing he had ever done to me. I sat in the dimly lit living room, the test results clutched tightly in my hands, my heart pounding with the weight of the truth. Parker thought he had discarded me like an inconvenience, dismissed me as defective, and walked away without a second thought. But he had no idea that the very thing he used to destroy me would be the blade that cut him down. My mind replayed his words over and over again. "I'm divorcing you. You can't give me children. I deserve better." That single sentence had shattered something inside me, but as I held those test results, something new took its place. Clarity. He had built his escape on a lie, and I now held the proof that turned his entire narrative to dust. I could have called him that night. I could have screamed at him, thrown the truth in his face, demanded to know why he had blamed me for something that was never my fault. But that wasn't enough. Parker didn't deserve an easy confrontation. He deserved something far worse. Instead, I let the anger settle, smoothing over my emotions until they were sharp and precise. This was no longer about heartbreak. This was about justice. The next morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer. If Parker wanted a divorce, he would get one. But not on his terms. I sat across from the attorney, hands folded neatly in my lap, my expression unreadable. "Are you prepared for this?" she asked, glancing over the paperwork. "More than you know," I responded, sliding the test results toward her. Her brows furrowed as she scanned the paper. Then slowly she looked up at me, understanding dawning in her eyes. "He blamed you for this?" I nodded, my lips pressing together. Then let's make sure he regrets it, she said with a small, knowing smile. That night as I lay in bed, I wondered how long it would take for Parker to realize his mistake. Would he gloat in his supposed victory, believing he had escaped the burden of me? Would he parade his new relationship around, thinking he had traded up? It didn't matter. Because soon the illusion he had crafted would crumble beneath him. Days passed in a blur of quiet preparation. I continued with my life as if nothing had changed, keeping my silence as Parker moved forward with his. His mother had stopped calling, likely too busy planning his future with a woman who could supposedly give him what I couldn't. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. One afternoon I received a text from a mutual friend. You should know. Parker is already engaged. I stared at the words for a long moment, feeling nothing but cold amusement. He hadn't even finalized our divorce and he was already moving on. So desperate to erase me, he hadn't even considered that the truth might still be lurking in the shadows, waiting for its moment. The next step was clear. I needed to know who she was. With a little digging, it didn't take long to find out. Social media told me everything I needed to know. She was young, beautiful, from a wealthy family. The kind of woman his mother would have handpicked. And just like that, the final piece of my plan fell into place. I packed my bags. I was going to his city. Parker thought he had left me behind, but he was about to learn a painful lesson. You can't bury the truth forever. The moment I stepped off the train, I felt something inside me settle. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about reclaiming the power he had stolen from me. I found his fiancée's house easily. It was a grand home, the kind of place that screamed privilege. I rang the doorbell, my heartbeat steady, my hands clutching the envelope that contained Parker's undoing. A young woman answered, her bright eyes filled with curiosity. Can I help you? She asked politely. I think you need to see this before you say your vows, I said, handing her the envelope. She hesitated before taking it, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded the paper. I watched as her expression shifted, confusion giving way to disbelief, then something deeper, betrayal. What is this? She whispered. The truth, I said, my voice calm. Your fiancé told you I was infertile. That's why he left me. But the reality is he's the one who can't have children. She blinked rapidly, looking at the test results, then back at me. No, he wouldn't lie about something like this. I almost pitied her. Then ask him, I said simply. As if on cue, the front door opened. Parker stood there, his face frozen in shock the moment he saw me. Stella? His voice wavered, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. His fiancée turned to him, her expression raw with hurt. Tell me this isn't true, she demanded, shoving the papers toward him. He hesitated, his eyes darting between her and the documents. I could see the panic settling in, the way his brain scrambled for a way out. It's not. Is it true? She pressed. Did you leave her for something that wasn't even her fault? Silence. A silence so thick, so damning that it told her everything she needed to know. Her hands dropped to her sides, the test results fluttering to the ground. Parker turned to me, desperation creeping into his expression. You set me up, he hissed, his voice low. I tilted my head, amusement flickering across my face. I didn't set you up, Parker. You did this to yourself. His fiancée let out a sharp breath, shaking her head. I can't believe this. You lied to me. You made me believe she was the problem, that you were the victim. Parker reached for her, but she stepped back, disgust flashing across her features. Don't touch me. The door behind her opened wider and suddenly her parents were there. Older, wiser and furious. What's going on? Her father demanded. She turned to them, holding up the papers. He lied. He can't give me children. And he blamed his ex-wife for it. Her father's face darkened and her mother let out a soft gasp, her hands clutching at her chest. Parker's mouth opened but no words came out. He was trapped, exposed, his betrayal laid bare for everyone to see. And just like that, the engagement was over. His fiancée stormed inside, her parents following, leaving Parker standing alone on the doorstep, defeated. I took one step closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. You humiliated me, blamed me, discarded me. But you forgot one thing, Parker. I leaned in slightly, my voice like ice. The truth always comes out. His jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists. But there was nothing he could do. I turned and walked away, never looking back. Let him stand there. Let him feel what it was like to be powerless. Because for the first time in months, I wasn't the one left behind. I was the one walking away. I walked away from Parker's shattered world, my footsteps steady, my heart lighter than it had been in months. The sound of his fiancée's voice, thick with betrayal, still echoed in my ears. Her parents' disapproving stares. Parker's stunned silence. The weight of the truth pressing down on him as he realized his carefully constructed lie had collapsed in the worst way possible. Publicly, irrevocably, and without a chance to salvage his reputation. But I wasn't done. Parker had torn my life apart without a second thought. He had left me humiliated, discarded, convinced that I was the broken one. Now it was his turn to experience that same gut-wrenching despair. And I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of closure. That night I ignored the barrage of calls and messages he sent. Each unread text was another thread unraveling in his desperation. He wanted answers, explanations, he wanted to know why I had done this. But the truth was, I hadn't done anything except show up with the reality he had been too much of a coward to face. The next morning my lawyer called. "Stella, he's reached out. He wants to meet." I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head. "He doesn't get to ask for meetings. He wanted a divorce? Let's give it to him. Are you sure? This is the time to negotiate if you want anything out of it." "I don't want his money, his house, or anything he touched," I said evenly. "I just want him to realize what he threw away." My lawyer paused before responding, her voice laced with admiration. "Consider it done." That afternoon the official papers were drafted. Parker's name was stamped across them in cold, legal ink, his decision to leave me now set in stone. But before they could be delivered, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. "Parker." I let it ring 3 times before answering, keeping my voice cool and unreadable. "What do you want?" There was silence on the other end, followed by a sharp inhale. "You ruined everything, Stella." I arched an eyebrow, even though he couldn't see me. "Did I? Or did you just finally get caught? You had no right to do what you did." His voice was edged with anger, but beneath it I could hear something else. Uncertainty. "And you had no right to drag my name through the mud, blaming me for something that was never my fault." I shot back, my grip tightening around the phone. "You wanted to move on? Fine. But you don't get to rewrite history and turn me into the villain just because you couldn't face the truth." He exhaled harshly, the weight of his loss settling in. "You don't understand, Stella. I had no choice." "You always had a choice, Parker," I cut in, my tone sharp. "You could have been honest. You could have treated me with the respect I deserved. But instead you chose cowardice. And now you're the one left with nothing." The silence that followed stretched between us, thick and heavy. For the first time in our entire relationship, Parker was the one at a loss for words. "So what now?" he asked finally, his voice quieter, almost hesitant. "Now?" I let out a humorless chuckle. "Now you sign the divorce papers and watch as I walk away. For good." "You don't have to do this," he murmured, his voice laced with something dangerously close to regret. I closed my eyes briefly, forcing back the flood of emotions his words triggered. There had been a time when I would have given anything to hear that from him. A time when his remorse would have mattered. But that time had passed. "I do, Parker," I said, my voice unwavering. "And I will." I ended the call before he could say anything else. The divorce papers were delivered the next day. I expected resistance, maybe another phone call, a desperate attempt to delay the inevitable. But Parker did nothing. He signed them without a fight. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was resignation. Or maybe for the first time in his life he realized that there was no undoing what he had done. A week later I was officially free. I stood outside the courthouse, staring at the final documents in my hands. It was over. The man who had once promised me forever was now nothing more than a chapter in my past. A painful lesson that had ultimately led to my liberation. But just as I turned to leave, my phone vibrated. A message. From Parker. "I don't know who I am without you." I stared at the words for a long moment. Not out of sadness, not out of longing, but out of sheer disbelief at his audacity. This was a man who had walked away from me, convinced that I was the problem. He had publicly humiliated me, abandoned me without hesitation, and replaced me before our marriage was even over. And now he was the one who felt lost. I took a deep breath, the final piece of my anger fading into something quieter. Acceptance. Without overthinking it, I typed my response. "That's not my problem anymore." And with that I blocked his number. There was nothing left to say. In the days that followed I allowed myself to breathe again. The weight that had once suffocated me was gone, replaced by a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I began rebuilding, piece by piece, day by day. I threw away everything that reminded me of Parker, erasing him from my space, my thoughts, my life. And then for the first time in months I looked in the mirror and saw someone new staring back at me. Not a woman who had been abandoned. Not someone who had been deemed unworthy. But a woman who had survived. Who had won. Meanwhile, Parker's life began to unravel. His engagement was beyond repair. His mother, who had once praised him as the perfect son, now barely spoke to him. The whispers about his deception spread quickly. People weren't kind to men who destroyed their wives for their own insecurities. His career took a hit. His social circle diminished. And slowly but surely, the life he had built on lies collapsed around him. Me. I was moving forward. Parker had been my past, but my future belonged to me. And this time I wasn't looking back. I had thought blocking Parker's number would be the final chapter of this story, that once I had walked away, I would never have to hear from him again. But karma has a way of ensuring justice is served in full. 2 weeks after our divorce was finalized, I received a message from an unknown number. Stella, you need to know something. Parker is trying to fix his engagement. He's meeting her family this weekend to convince them to take him back. He's lying again. I read the message twice, my fingers tightening around my phone. I didn't recognize the sender, but I didn't need to. The truth was clear. Parker was still trying to manipulate his way out of the mess he had created. For a brief moment I considered ignoring it. I had already won. Parker had been exposed, humiliated, and left to deal with the wreckage of his choices. I had nothing to gain by interfering. But then I thought about the woman he was trying to deceive. His former fiancée, the one who had been just as much a victim of his lies as I had. She had believed in him, trusted him, only to find out that the foundation of their relationship was built on deception. And now he was trying to lure her back. I couldn't let that happen. Parker had already ruined one life. I wasn't going to let him ruin another. That weekend I took a train back to his city, my bag packed with the only thing I needed: proof. The house was grand, a towering estate that reeked of wealth and privilege. I stood on the sidewalk across the street, watching as guests arrived in elegant cars, each one stepping inside, oblivious to the storm that was about to unfold. I waited until Parker arrived. He stepped out of his car, dressed in an expensive suit, his expression composed, confident. He looked like a man who still believed he could control the outcome of his life. A man who thought he could erase the past with a few well-placed apologies. He had no idea I was watching. No idea that his past was about to walk through those doors and unravel everything. Taking a deep breath, I crossed the street and approached the entrance. A doorman stopped me at the steps. "This is a private event, miss." I smiled politely, holding up an envelope. "I know. That's why I need to be here." Before he could respond, a familiar voice called from inside. "Who is that?" His former fiancée appeared at the doorway, her face tight with confusion. When her gaze landed on me, she froze. "Stella?" Parker turned at the sound of my name, his entire body going rigid. His confident expression faltered, his hands clenching at his sides. I met his gaze, holding back a smirk as I watched the panic creep into his eyes. "I need to speak with you," I said, my voice even. "Privately." She hesitated, glancing between me and Parker. "There's nothing she needs to say," Parker interjected quickly, stepping forward as if to block me. I didn't even look at him. I kept my eyes locked on her. "You trusted him once. Don't make the same mistake again." Something flickered across her face. She turned to the doorman, giving a small nod. "Let her in." Parker stiffened. "This is ridiculous." "No, Parker," she cut him off sharply. "What's ridiculous is that you still think you can lie your way out of this." She led me inside, ignoring the curious glances from the guests, guiding me into a quieter room down the hall. The moment the door closed, she turned to me, arms crossed. "What do you have to say?" I didn't hesitate. I pulled out my phone, swiping to a set of documents. The medical reports, the court records, every piece of evidence that proved Parker's deception in full. I handed it to her. "You need to see this." She took the phone, her eyes scanning the screen. With every second that passed, her expression darkened. "He said he was honest with me," she whispered, more to herself than to me. He said the same thing to me too, I replied. But the truth? He lied to both of us. And now he's trying to do it again. She exhaled sharply, closing her eyes for a moment as if trying to steady herself. Then without another word she turned and walked out of the room. I followed. Parker was standing in the main hall speaking to her parents. The moment he saw us approaching, his face paled. "What did she say to you?" he demanded, his voice tight. She didn't respond. Instead she walked straight to her father, handing him my phone. "Read this," she said, her voice hard. Her father took the phone, adjusting his glasses as he scrolled through the documents. I watched as his expression shifted from confusion to understanding, then to something much colder. He handed the phone back to her before turning to Parker. "Leave. Now." Parker's mouth fell open. "Sir, please." I said leave, her father repeated, his voice firm, unwavering. Her mother stepped beside him, disappointment evident in her features. "We gave you the benefit of the doubt once, Parker. That won't happen again." Parker turned to his former fiancée, desperation creeping into his voice. "You can't believe her over me." She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I don't believe her over you, Parker. I believe her because of you. Because every time I've caught you in a lie, you've done exactly this. Tried to deny it, tried to blame someone else. But the truth is right in front of me and I won't ignore it." Parker's lips parted but nothing came out. He looked around the room as if searching for an ally. But all he found were stares filled with quiet judgment. He had no more defenses. No more lies to hide behind. With no other option, he turned on his heel and stormed out, his footsteps echoing through the grand hall. And just like that, his engagement was over. As I stepped outside, a cool breeze brushed against my skin, carrying away the remnants of my past. For the first time in a long time I felt truly free. I had come here to expose Parker, but in the process I had done something even greater. I had ensured that no one else would suffer under his deception the way I had. And that was enough. As I walked down the street, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I glanced at the screen. A message. From Parker. "You ruined my life." I stared at the words, a slow smile spreading across my lips. Without hesitation I typed a response. "No, Parker. You did that all by yourself." And with that I deleted his message. Forever. I deleted Parker's message without hesitation, my fingers steady, my mind clear. There was nothing left to say. His life had unraveled, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the bitter taste of his own choices. I had walked away victorious, leaving him to stand in the ruins of his deception. But fate wasn't done with him yet. Over the next few weeks, the whispers surrounding Parker only grew louder. His engagement was officially called off, his fiancée's family cutting all ties with him. They wanted nothing to do with a man who had built his relationships on lies. The news spread quickly, turning Parker into a cautionary tale among their social circles. The man who had tried to discard his past only to have it come back and destroy his future. And then the real consequences started. One morning as I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed with another message. This time it wasn't from Parker. It was from an old acquaintance who had stayed in touch with people from his workplace. "You might want to hear this. Parker's job is in trouble." I raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. "What happened?" I typed back. A few seconds later another message came through. Apparently his boss heard about everything. His fiancée's father is a major investor in the company, and after what happened, they started questioning Parker's integrity. Word is he's on the chopping block. I stared at the screen, absorbing the weight of those words. Parker had always prided himself on his career. His job was the one thing he held above everything else. Even when our marriage had been falling apart, he had thrown himself into work, using it as an escape, as a way to convince himself he was still in control. But now that control was slipping. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. A week later the inevitable happened. Parker was fired. His company released a vague statement about restructuring, about making changes, but everyone knew the truth. His reputation had been permanently stained, and no business wanted to be associated with a man who had publicly been exposed as a liar. His mother, once his most ardent supporter, was furious. "How could you let this happen, Parker?" she reportedly snapped at him during one of their last conversations. "You ruined everything. Do you know how embarrassing this is for me?" Even she, the woman who had once stood by his side as he tore me down, had finally turned her back on him. Without a job, without a fiancé, without his mother's unwavering support, Parker found himself truly alone for the first time in his life. And it only got worse. One evening as I walked through the city, I spotted a familiar figure sitting alone at a small cafe. Parker. His usually well-groomed appearance was gone. He looked exhausted, unshaven, his clothes slightly wrinkled, a stark contrast to the man he had once been. I debated walking past him, ignoring his presence altogether. But something made me pause. Not pity, not forgiveness, but curiosity. He hadn't seen me yet, so I took a seat at a nearby bench, watching as he sat there, staring blankly at his phone. The arrogance, the confidence, the entitled belief that he could manipulate his way through life. It was all gone. I thought about the way he had once treated me, the way he had humiliated me, discarded me without a second thought. I thought about the moment he had told me I wasn't enough, that he deserved better. And now he had nothing. I could have confronted him. I could have walked up to his table and given him one final reminder of everything he had lost. But I didn't need to. He already knew. So I stood up, turned, and walked away. A few days later, Parker tried reaching out again. I had kept his number blocked, but an email found its way through. Stella, it began, his tone softer than I had ever heard before. I don't expect you to respond to this. I don't even know if you'll read it. But I need to say this. I was wrong. About everything. About you. About the way I treated you. I let my pride, my fear, and my own failures blind me, and now I see what I've done. I thought I was moving on, but all I did was destroy everything around me. I lost my job, my engagement, my reputation. Even my mother barely speaks to me anymore. And honestly, I don't blame her. Because for the first time in my life I realized that I did this to myself. No one else. Just me. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand. That I finally see the damage I caused. I hope you're happy, Stella. I really do. I read the message twice, letting his words sink in. For so long I had dreamed of this moment. The moment Parker would finally realize the weight of his actions. And now that it had happened, I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No bitterness. Just peace. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his regret. As I had already won. And the best revenge wasn't anger or hatred. It was moving on. Without hesitation I deleted the email. And just like that, Parker was nothing more than a distant memory. Months passed and life moved forward. I rebuilt myself from the ashes he had left me in, creating a life filled with happiness, purpose, and genuine love. And Parker? Parker remained exactly where he had put himself, lost in the wreckage of his own making. Parker's email had been the final thread connecting me to the past, and when I deleted it, I felt a quiet sense of finality settle over me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even satisfied. I was just free. For the first time in what felt like forever, my life belonged solely to me. No more walking on eggshells, no more trying to prove my worth to someone who had never deserved me. My future was mine to shape, and I intended to fill it with everything Parker had tried to convince me I couldn't have: happiness, love, and a family of my own. But before I could step into that future, I had to rediscover myself. The weeks following Parker's downfall were quiet but healing. I spent my days reconnecting with old friends, people I had lost touch with during my marriage. I traveled to places I had always wanted to visit, indulging in the simple joys of life. And most importantly, I stopped blaming myself. For so long, I had internalized Parker's words, carrying the weight of his accusations as if they were truths. But now, with clarity and distance, I could finally see them for what they were: the desperate lies of a weak man trying to mask his own failures. I wasn't broken. I wasn't unworthy. I was stronger than I had ever given myself credit for. 6 months passed and the transformation was undeniable. Gone was the woman who had once stared at herself in the mirror, wondering if she was enough. In her place stood someone confident, self-assured, and no longer defined by the pain of the past. I had moved cities, started a new job, and built a life that was completely my own. And just when I thought my story had already reached its perfect resolution, fate had one last surprise in store for me. It happened on an ordinary afternoon in the most unexpected way. I was standing in line at a cafe waiting for my order when I felt someone tap my shoulder lightly. "Excuse me, I think you dropped this." I turned around and found myself looking into the kindest pair of brown eyes I had ever seen. The man standing before me held out a small notepad I hadn't even realized I had dropped. "Oh," I said, feeling momentarily caught off guard. "Thank you," he smiled, handing it to me. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seem really familiar." I studied him for a moment, trying to place him. There was something about his face that seemed vaguely recognizable, but I couldn't quite figure out why. "I don't think we've met before," I replied slowly. "Maybe not," he said with a small chuckle. "But you have one of those faces. The kind that sticks with you." I wasn't sure what to make of that, but I found myself smiling. He extended his hand. "I'm Daniel." "Stella," I replied, shaking it. It was a simple interaction, just two strangers meeting by chance. But something about it felt different. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and I kept running into each other. At the same cafe, at a bookstore down the street, even at a small community event I had decided to attend on a whim. Each time, our conversations grew longer, our interactions more natural. He was warm, genuine, the kind of person who made you feel like you had known him forever even if you had just met. And for the first time in a long time, I found myself opening up to someone without fear. One evening, after we had spent hours talking over coffee, he leaned back in his chair and studied me thoughtfully. "You know, Stella, you're one of the strongest people I've ever met." I let out a small laugh. "I wouldn't say that." "I would," he said firmly. "I don't know your whole story, but I can tell you've been through a lot. And yet here you are, living, thriving. That's strength." His words struck something deep within me. For so long I had been defined by my past. By Parker. By the pain. But here was someone who saw beyond all of that. Someone who saw me. And for the first time I let myself believe that I deserved this. That I deserved to be happy again. Months passed, and what started as friendship grew into something more. Daniel was different from anyone I had ever known. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He didn't play games or make me feel like I had to prove my worth. He just loved me. Fully, unconditionally, without hesitation. And the best part? I loved him too. 2 years later, I stood in front of a mirror, adjusting the delicate fabric of my wedding dress. I had never thought I would find myself here again. Never thought I would trust someone enough to let them into my life in this way. But as I looked at my reflection, I didn't see the woman Parker had left behind. I saw a woman who had survived. A woman who had won. A soft knock on the door made me turn. My best friend peeked in, a wide smile on her face. "You ready?" I took a deep breath, my heart full. More than ever. That day as I walked down the aisle, I saw Daniel standing at the end of it, his eyes filled with nothing but love. And for the first time in years I knew, this was what real happiness looked like. Not the illusion Parker had once dangled in front of me. Not the validation I had once sought from someone who never deserved me. This. Right here. Pure. True. And as I took Daniel's hand, I silently thanked the universe for leading me here. For showing me that sometimes, the worst betrayals can lead to the most beautiful new beginnings. 2 years later, I sat on the porch of our home watching as my twin boys played in the garden, their laughter filling the air. Daniel stepped beside me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders, pressing a soft kiss to my temple. "They've got your smile," he murmured. I smiled, resting my head against his shoulder. "They've got your heart." And in that moment, with my children's laughter surrounding me, my husband's warmth beside me, and the weight of my past finally nothing more than a distant memory, I realized. I had everything I had ever wanted. And Parker? He was nothing more than a name I once knew. A shadow that no longer held power over me. A chapter that had been closed long ago. Parker's name had long faded from my thoughts, reduced to nothing more than an old chapter in a book I no longer cared to read. My life had moved forward in the most beautiful way possible, with love, laughter, and a family that filled my days with joy. But while I had moved on, Parker remained stuck in the past, trapped in the wreckage of his own choices. It had been years since I had last seen him. The last time he had been sitting alone in a cafe, looking lost in a way I had never seen before. I had walked past him without a second glance, knowing that his suffering was no longer mine to carry. I never thought about what had happened to him after that. Until one day fate decided to remind me. I was at the grocery store pushing my cart down the aisle when I heard 2 women whispering near the produce section. I wasn't paying attention at first, but then I heard a name that made me pause. "Parker Harris? You mean that guy who used to be engaged to Emily Lawson?" "Yes." "Can you believe what happened to him?" I turned slightly, pretending to inspect the apples as I listened. I heard he's barely getting by now. Lost his job, his reputation, everything. And apparently he's still not over his ex-wife. I blinked. Ex-wife. They were talking about me. You mean Stella? The other woman asked, lowering her voice. Yeah, the first woman continued. I heard he still asks people about her. Apparently he saw a picture of her with her husband and kids recently and completely lost it. I felt my breath catch. Parker had seen a glimpse of my new life and it had shaken him. For a brief moment I considered walking away, leaving this moment behind just as I had left Parker. But something held me there. He did it to himself, the second woman said with a shrug. No one forced him to throw her away. Now he has to live with the fact that she's happy while he's all alone. The conversation moved on, but I stood frozen in place. Parker was still haunted by me. I didn't know how to feel about that. There was a time when I would have wanted this, when I would have relished the idea of him watching me thrive while he suffered. But now, with a life so full and beautiful, I found that I didn't feel much at all. He was a shadow, a ghost from a past I had long since buried. But I knew one thing: he had finally learned what true loss felt like. A few weeks later I received an unexpected email. It was from Parker. For a moment I debated whether to even open it. But curiosity got the better of me. Stella, it began. I know I have no right to reach out to you. I know you've moved on and you probably don't even think about me anymore. But I saw a picture of you recently. You were with your husband and your kids. And I realized something that I should have realized years ago. You were always meant to be happy. I just wasn't the man who deserved to give you that happiness. I thought I was winning when I left. I thought I was moving on to something better. But all I did was destroy the best thing that ever happened to me. I don't expect you to respond. I don't expect you to care. But I just needed to say this, even if you never read it. I'm sorry. For everything. I hope you continue to have the life you deserve. And I hope someday I can find a way to let go of the past the way you have. I read the email twice, letting his words sink in. And then, without a second thought, I typed out my reply. Parker. You're right. I don't think about you anymore. And I don't hate you. I don't wish you harm. But I also don't wish you back into my life in any way. You humiliated me. You abandoned me. But fate had other plans. Enjoy your loneliness. And with that I hit send. I didn't check to see if he responded. I didn't care. Because for the first time in my life, Parker Harris was truly nothing to me. That night, as I lay in bed beside my husband, I listened to the soft breathing of my children down the hall. My life was full. My heart was at peace. And Parker would spend the rest of his life knowing he had thrown away everything he had ever wanted. That was his punishment. That was his karma. And that was the final chapter of a story I had long since closed. I placed my phone down beside me, the screen fading to black as Parker's final words vanished from my sight. His apology, his regret. None of it held any power over me. I had moved on, built a life so full and beautiful that his existence barely registered in my world anymore. Yet in that quiet moment, as I lay in bed beside my husband, listening to the soft hum of life around me, I found myself reflecting on everything that had led me here. There was a time when Parker's betrayal had consumed me, when his words had sliced through my confidence like a blade, leaving me bleeding with self-doubt. He had humiliated me, discarded me, convinced me that I was the problem. But in the end he had only deceived himself. Because life had proven otherwise. I had won. Not by seeking revenge. Not by stooping to his level. But by thriving despite everything he had done to me. The next morning, as the sun filtered through the bedroom window, I stretched my arms and glanced over at Daniel. He was already awake, his eyes studying me with that familiar warmth that never faded, even after years of being together. You're thinking about something, he murmured, reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. I smiled, intertwining my fingers with his. Just reflecting. His brow lifted slightly. Good thoughts, I hope? The best ones. I sat up, wrapping my arms around my knees as I watched the golden light spill across the room. You know, I said softly, if you had told me years ago that I would be this happy, I wouldn't have believed you. Daniel shifted, propping himself up on one elbow. Because of him? I nodded, not needing to say Parker's name. He had long since become a forgotten ghost, a whisper of the past that held no weight in my present. He made me believe I wasn't enough, I admitted. And for a long time I let myself believe that too. Daniel exhaled slowly, his fingers tracing gentle patterns along my wrist. You were never the problem, Stella. He was. I turned to him, my heart full of gratitude. I know that now. And I know I would have never found you if I hadn't gone through all of that first. His lips curled into a smile, his eyes filled with something deeper than love, understanding. Then maybe, he said, pressing a soft kiss to my temple, it was all meant to happen exactly as it did. I let those words settle into my soul, feeling their truth. Yes, Parker had broken me. Yes, he had pushed me to my lowest. But in doing so he had unknowingly led me to something far greater. He had set me free. Later that afternoon, as I sat on the porch watching my children play in the garden, I let my mind drift to a time when I had once envisioned this life with Parker. A future where we would have been a family, where love would have kept us together. But the woman I was back then hadn't understood what real love was. Real love wasn't about endurance. It wasn't about proving yourself worthy to someone who constantly made you feel less than. It was effortless. It was safe. It was a partnership, not a battle. And that's what I had found with Daniel. I glanced at my boys, our boys, laughing as they ran across the yard, their joy so pure, so full of life. Parker had told me I would never have this. And yet here I was, living the very dream he had tried to take from me. Life had a way of making things right. Of balancing the scales. Of ensuring that those who inflicted pain would one day feel its weight themselves. I didn't hate Parker. I didn't wish him suffering. But I did hope he had finally learned. Not for me, but for himself. Because at the end of the day, karma isn't about punishment. It isn't about vengeance. It's about truth. And the truth was, Parker had created his own downfall. I had simply walked away and let fate handle the rest. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I pulled out my phone one last time and typed a message. Not to Parker, but to the universe itself. Thank you. For the lessons. For the pain. For the strife. For the love I had found after it all. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't anger or hatred. It's happiness. And I had found mine. Forever.